I was, and still am, a huge conspiracy guy. I literally ran out of new tin hat topics to research, and I still wouldn't look at this one without embarrassment. But every time I glanced at it, there was something unresolved.
Well, hi everyone, and greetings from Northern Michigan. This is Bob the Science Guy. Today we're going to have a look at Flat Earth Clues Part 4 by Mark Sargent. Well, the first three were pretty silly and easy to refute. In this episode, Mark explains his Truman Show philosophy that the world is a terrarium, with the authority as the puppet master. Let's cue up the music.
Flat Earth Clues, Part 4, Shell Beach. This is part of a series of clues that can help you get your head around both the design of the flat Earth system we live in and who has been involved in the deception to hide it from you. This clue covers the near-perfect design of the flat Earth model and will break down some of the logic behind the decisions made. It sounds like a big task, and it is, but to start, let's look at something small, like this little guy.
Now Mark is starting this off trying to lay some groundwork for a later concept that we are simply mice in a terrarium, toiling away at our lives for the benefit of some authority. Now I'm going to allow him to continue to build in his movie philosophy, but if this was me doing this, I would probably have chosen The Matrix rather than The Truman Show. Because while The Truman Show had their beloved dome, The Matrix was a society of humans that lived their lives completely independent of any knowledge that there was anything beyond it, while a sinister machine overlord harvested their bodies for electricity, placating a select few breeders in a make-believe society, simply to keep production of people going.
People identify with mice because they're used to seeing them in lab experiments. Mice also don't have any sinister connotations. They're seen as relatively innocent and benign, the perfect test subject, as it were. I have yet to meet anyone who has a bias against the lab mouse. So the mouse goes into the box for the first time, and the reaction is always the same. It explores its surroundings, and more importantly, tests the barrier around it, probing for exits or potential exits. The mouse inspects every inch of its new glass home, and at some point settles into the acceptance that the walls are indeed solid and that it may be there for a while. Every so often it will repeat the process, again checking the boundaries of the cage, just in case something has changed. What it doesn't do is act like it would in the wild, because it realizes that it's in a form of captivity. The glass box doesn't even remotely resemble its natural environment. You could put this box in the middle of a forest and the mouse may feel slightly better about its situation, but it still knows that it's been trapped against its will, and will settle into a non-native lifestyle. Take the same animal and now put it into the middle of a 100-mile square wildlife preserve, surrounded on all sides by a similar type of glass enclosure. The creature doesn't even bother to rush the size of the preserve and start testing the boundaries, mostly because it's out of visual range. It could be days or even weeks before it even encounters a single fence. The animal's routine is spent doing what it normally would do. It eats, it sleeps, it breeds. It does everything that it would naturally do in the wild. If one day the animal approaches the fence, there might be some curiosity, but any anxiety is quickly resolved by just turning around and heading back into the vast expanse from which it came. The point here is that all creatures great and small inside a giant wildlife preserve, when encountering the fence, wouldn't care. They would all in their own way just shrug and move on with their lives. However, if you take a human, male or female, regardless of education or nurturing, and put them in the exact same wildlife sanctuary, the response would be quite different. When the human approaches the glass fence, they don't see it as a minor distraction. They pause, they wonder, and more importantly, they ask questions, either internally or amongst others. Why is the fence here? How far does it reach? Can I dig underneath, or climb over, or go around it? These questions continue in a way you might imagine, but eventually a bigger question jumps to the top of the list. Who built the fence? It is that which changes not only the type of questions being asked, but how the human being, or beings, look at their world. The giant wildlife preserve suddenly gets smaller. Each new fence border discovered starts to artificially constrict their expanse, even though the dimensions haven't changed. Before long, the preserve, their home, loses some of its relevance. The fence is a reminder of the unknown. It provokes fear and endless speculation within the human. Given enough time, the importance of the preserve continues to be reduced, especially in relation to the fence. And the reason why it's so engrossing for the human is simple. It's there. It's real. They can see it, and maybe even touch it.
Perhaps it's my personality type or the fact that I'm an optimist that I don't look at barriers with fear. I look at barriers as a challenge to overcome, and I think many other people see them the same way. Another thought is to have a look at this corn plant right here. Now, an animal will look at it and see a plant. As a person, I'll look at it and say, cool, that's a living thing. Then I'll start asking questions. Why is it green? What makes it grow? Can I use it in some way? Then, quite frankly, if corn plants are my thing, I could spend an entire lifetime learning about the micro-root system or the cellular structure of the leaves, or learn to breed it to provide more corn per acre. I could develop agriculture. I could develop a fertilizer industry. I could develop transportation to bring corn to where people needed it to eat. In short, I could strive to understand the natural world and the biology of this particular corn plant. My colleague in the lab across the hall will do the same with potatoes.
Adding more humans to the equation increases the disparity of this situation by orders of magnitude. Have you seen the fence? Do you know how long it's been here? Have you ever known anyone that's been outside it? It's older than us. Who is responsible for the fence? What can we do to appease the group that created it? You can see what this might lead to.
Well, yes, I can see how this could lead to a belief in a higher being and a desire to understand things in the world that we don't have a reason for by having that faith in a higher being. A sense of faith gives many people a comfort in life and a sense of purpose, and I don't have a problem with that, not one bit. For others, it leads us to places like this. This is my alma mater, Michigan State University, where I studied natural sciences. Both faith and education address the question that Mark raises, a desire to know more about the world around us and to have an answer to the question of why and who. They're not mutually incompatible. Many great minds of the past, Isaac Newton comes to mind right now, were deeply religious.
A long-lasting group hysteria would entrench itself within the population, grab hold and never let go. The fence is bigger, older, and wiser than they are. It humbles them, it angers them, and it is forever. It is their proof of a higher power. Maybe not God, but certainly God-like. No civilization, regardless of technology, discipline, or age, would be able to cope with the existence of it. For the human psyche, there are just too many questions that go unanswered. Life would never be able to progress normally.
No, Mark, I'm going to have to disagree with you on that. I think that when humans are presented with challenges, we rise to the challenge. We have a desire innate within our bodies and our souls to expand our horizons, to explore the unknown. To put this in terms that you might understand better, we wish to boldly go where no man has gone before. We are the same species that produced Admiral Richard Byrd, which you highlighted in your last episode. We all have that potential for adventure and exploration, The only difference is that we don't all utilize it. Some of us choose to live in the fantasy world of movies and Flat Earth for that matter. I include the former because it seems to be your mindset, and I include the latter because it's a very neat and tidy discipline that doesn't require any explanations.
To summarize, a garden variety wildlife preserve would work for 99.99% of all the world's life forms. For human beings, however, you would need to make some modifications, or really just one big one. So let's take a look at a few examples of how this could be accomplished, and from there expand it. The first failed example can be seen in the 1998 movie Dark City. This is a good starting point to get you in the right mindset. The premise here is that an advanced race creates a small flat Earth area, complete with a traditional dome. The design, however, is initially flawed in that they built the city all the way to the outer edge, leaving no room for error. To compensate for this, they altered the memories of the human population on a regular basis, therefore repressing any long-term investigations. However, in movies, there are always anomalies, like the police officer who realizes that even though he remembers visiting a place called Shell Beach, there is no way to reach it, because Shell Beach is outside of the flat world and never existed. He just keeps going around the circular city that has no exits. In the end, another man, the hero of the movie, makes it to the edge, steals the advanced race's power, and creates an ocean, which really should have been there in the first place.
Now I find Mark rather insightful here. He identifies the main problem with this terrarium analogy that he makes. If humans know that there is a barrier, they will seek to overcome it. So the only way to keep them in a terrarium is do not allow them to know that there is a barrier. He's going to develop this further in his favorite analogy of the Truman Show.
Move from there to a movie released only 4 months later called The Truman Show. Inevitably, all flat earthers have to take a hard look at this movie from a technical point of view. The movie follows the same lines as Dark City, but in a much more relatable premise, that of a giant television stage built so that the outside world can watch a person go through his life without any knowledge that he is living inside a flat world, surrounded by a physical dome. The movie is interesting on several levels, including construction. Using their existing model of a small town, bordered on one side by a large lagoon and wilderness, and the other a seemingly expansive ocean, while better than Dark City, still had its flaws. For one, it was less than 20 miles across, and even though Truman's desire to explore was repressed, there was still a chance that he would venture to the outer edge, which is where the movie ended. But for the most part, it worked. Truman believed the entire scenario because he was born into it, and then lived 30-plus years without any reason to doubt where he was, which could be said for any of us. If it wasn't for the, and we'll say movie mistakes, that the studio fell victim to, then the show would have never ended.
This is one of my favorite clips from the movie. It could happen to you. This shows that there was an active effort to suppress inquiry about the outside world or the world beyond the bridge from your little town. The reason for that, of course, was that the town itself was an illusion in a contained system, like a terrarium. And that was the premise behind both of these movies. People were unknowingly living in a contained system. The first, the memories were suppressed. The second was the man just simply didn't know any different. Now, did you notice that Mark also tossed in the fact that they were quote-unquote flat Earths as well, even though that had absolutely nothing to do with any of those movies, nor was it a premise of those movies? It was just a little subliminal, or not so subliminal, suggestion that he was making. Once again, I think Mark's next point is interesting as well. What if this was all put into action by another being, and the descendants of the original inhabitants simply weren't aware that there was anything different? Mark is actually making a very good point for a very silly argument, but a good point nonetheless.
A fictional situation just like that was made into the 2004 movie, The Village. And even though it turned into one of those M. Night Shyamalan plot twist things, the premise was very feasible. A wealthy group of idealists buy a large parcel of land in an existing wildlife preserve, create a small town from the 1800s, and raise children there. They pay off government officials to keep planes far away and spread a myth that monsters live in the forest. As far as the kids are concerned, they actually are living in a small Pennsylvania town in the 1800s. And being born into it, why wouldn't they? If the story continued, eventually the elders that founded the town would all pass away, leaving the children to pass on the legacy, free from any burden of guilt that their world was not what it appeared to be. Assuming the technology was possible, how many people like Truman could you keep in a dome the size of, say, a state that was hundreds of miles across? Probably thousands. If you kept expanding the size of the dome to a few thousand miles, well, then you're talking millions. But when it gets that big, something interesting happens. You don't need the actors anymore. Started up like The Village, and within just a few generations, everyone is oblivious. And you can leave them to their own devices. Starting to sound familiar? In fact, the larger you make the enclosed world, the less micromanaging needs to be done. It gets easier as it scales up. You place in gradual negative reinforcement, one that creates an illusion of choice. Look at the flat Earth map again. Continents grouped in the center, surrounded in all directions by hundreds of miles of salt water. As you move closer to the edge, the temperature starts taking a nosedive. Then you start seeing icebergs. If that doesn't stop you, then you run into what we call Antarctica, which is a steep climb 2 miles up with no plant life or indigenous livestock animals. And if you had the wherewithal to make it that far, you would still have hundreds of miles of endless ice and snow. It's easy to see why so few people have gone the distance.
That is a lucid, intelligent, well thought out objection.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Overruled.
Well, so few people may have gone to the South Pole, but the bottom line is people have gone to the South Pole. In the last 70 years, thousands of people, have lived and worked and done research in Antarctica. In fact, you're more than welcome to go there as a tourist. Tickets are $51,250. How many would you like? Recall, I did say you could go. I didn't say that it would be cheap or that you could get there on your good looks and burning desire to do your own research.
Compare this to the upper ceiling, which is much easier to maintain. You simply decrease the oxygen rates so that every 1,000 feet up, it gets more difficult to breathe. This slows down exploration over mountain ranges and discourages limited control flight, such as balloons. Also keep in mind that the dome itself doesn't have to be that high in relation to the outer ring.
Well, Mark, I'm afraid I'm going to have to disagree with you on that one. I actually put out a video a little while ago on a scientifically designed flat Earth model and map. In that video, I did demonstrate that a dome around the Earth, in order to fit with all other observations, would have to be spherical and encompass the entire flat Earth. This mandates that the dome has to be as high as it is wide. So a wide, flattened dome simply will not work on a flat Earth. I'll go ahead and put a link to the video in the description so people can see the actual reasoning behind this.
With commercial aircraft capping out at 10 miles and rockets less than 400, the dome would actually look more like a stadium roof, depending on how you wanted to display things like the sun, moon, and stars. An enclosed world with these type of safeguards would be able to sustain an unknowing population for, say, what, 4,500 years? Then you could artificially introduce a globe model into the scientific community before the civilization technology reaches a point that could lead to discovery. And 500 years later, here we are.
Mark, do you recall your friend Al-Biruni from the last video? The Persian scientist from 1,000 years ago that first proposed your beloved AE map? Well, from exactly the same article that you looked at, here is his method of determining the circumference and the radius of the Earth. A main problem of you and the Flat Earth movement in general is that you seem to believe that these numbers were just made up out of whole cloth. That simply is not true. They're not random numbers. They're designed and calculated based on many, many, many observations. You know, Phuket the other day made a statement that the downward acceleration that we notice all over the Earth due to gravity of 9.8 meters per second squared was just chosen at random because it was close to 10 and we like doing things in tens. That simply is not the case. These are measured values. They are what they are.
A civilization inside an amazing structure, doing what we would naturally do, while the authority stands by the gate and fears the consequences if we ever found out for ourselves. So do some of your own research and ask questions.
Well, I'm going to close this up by agreeing with Mark Sargent. We as humans do live in a terrarium. It is our planet Earth. We are hemmed in not by a dome, but by our atmosphere and the limitations of our physiology. We are a resourceful and reasoning species, capable of great advancements in science and technology. We can't fly ourselves, but we can design and use machines that can fly. We can breathe underwater with scuba and hard hat gear. And for the last 60 years, we've begun to adventure past our atmosphere into space. The vision of man that Mark would have you believe is that we are lab mice in a terrarium under the control of a researcher somewhere. My vision of mankind is that of Richard Byrd and George Mallory. We are a species that constantly strives to go beyond the next mountain. The first vision of Flat Earth is very comforting if you are not adventurous or don't wish to expand your horizons. It is a vision of life in a cage. Science looks at the world in wonderment and sees the endless possibilities, with the only expectation is that we have hope that we will know more tomorrow than we know today. This is Bob the Science Guy signing out from Northern Michigan. Thank you for stopping by and be sure to like and subscribe to my channel.
This rabbit hole's too deep for me. Feel my brain getting real sore.